Dear Tornister, dear Excellencies, dear Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm very honored to greet you in the Senate Hall of the Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin, in which just this morning we hosted an event called Humboldt in Dialogue. Dialogue, ladies and gentlemen, is an important tool in these challenging political times the European Union is facing. It is therefore that we are proud and privileged that the Humboldt Lectures on Europe, organized by the Walter Heilstein Institute, have become an established forum of discussion and dialogue on the future of Europe. For nearly 2 decades now, we have entered into discussion with distinguished speakers from all over Europe who have shared this vision on Europe with the political arena, academia and its students, as well as lawyers here in the heart of Berlin, a city that has grown and profited immensely from the process of European integration. Particularly now, with Brexit on the horizon, we are pleased to be able to provide this forum and enter into dialogue on the way forward. Your country, Mr. Coveney, is impacted like no other member state by the decision of the British people to leave the European Union. Your ties to continental Europe and the UK are equally strong, and you are the only country sharing a land border with the UK, a border that has not always seen the peacefulness we are seeing now. The consequences of Brexit are yet to be seen, and we are extremely happy to be able to host you here today and to hear your opinion and assessments. For all of us, cooperation within the EU, ladies and gentlemen, but also bilaterally between Ireland and Germany has been very fruitful. At this university, we are delighted to profit from the long-established partnership with both the Trinity College and the University College Dublin. Our students report anonymously that their stay at either one of these prestigious universities was greatly enriching and inspiring, both academically but also personally. We are extremely happy to host Irish students who often integrate very well in the student community. These student exchange programs are mutually profitable and help our students to become truly European citizens. They create a dialogue beyond borders. Dear Minister Coveney, dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to Berlin to enter into this dialogue with us. I'm looking forward for an interesting afternoon, and I will now pass the floor to Professor Ruffert, Director of the Walter Heilstein Institute and organizer of this lecture, to give us a few words of further introduction. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mrs. President, dear colleagues, Your Excellencies, dear students of Humboldt University Berlin, ladies and gentlemen, but above all, Tornister, dear Minister Coveney. In the past few years, Ireland was more than often in the focus of interest of those who study the European Union and its law. We remember that it was sometimes not so easy to convince the Irish people of further steps in European integration. When I started co-editing a major commentary on the EU treaties, the Irish referendum was one of the common events to wait for before a new edition could be published following a new treaty. And of course, we remember how severely Ireland was hit by the crisis beginning in 2007, being the only so-called program country supported by the EFSM and the EFSF in the northern part of the EU. Today, the perspective is very different. Ireland could cope with the crisis and is not anymore in need of any European financial support. After Brexit, Ireland has an even more important role in the European Union. The Irish population supports this, and the EU supports Ireland. The President of the European Council made clear that there will be no Brexit deal without a solution to Ireland's problems following the Article 50 move from the other island. From a distance, it appears that this new perspective is reflected in a deeper social change. I do not want to touch upon the difficult ethical questions your people had to decide upon most recently. But what we see, also from a distance of course, is that all the change is accompanied, not at all imposed upon, by a young governmental team. And please bear with me if I feel inclined to think about the young French President Emmanuel Macron, who gave his Humboldt speech in early 2017, when he was not president yet and even younger. We are proud to host today Simon Coveney, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Ireland, as a member of this government team for his Humboldt speech. Simon Coveney was born in Cork and graduated in agricultural studies, which, by the way, are also taught at this university, although you might not expect it in the 3.5 million capital. Simon Coveney has been a member of the Irish Parliament, the Dáil, since 1998, interrupted by membership of the European Parliament, which has no obligatory denomination in the Irish language, much to my relief, from 2004 to 2007. During his time at the European Parliament, he served in a variety of roles, including as a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and the publisher of the European Parliament's annual report on human rights in the world. Simon Coveney has been a minister with various portfolios since 2011: agriculture, defense, housing and planning, and now foreign affairs and trade since 2017, as well as deputy prime minister. In these roles, he has also been involved in the Future of Europe initiative launched by the Irish government. To my own benefit, I omit all his achievements in various sports, including rugby. Thank you for joining us today at Taoiseach and talk about the future of Europe. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Members of Parliament, Ambassadors, Excellencies, Professor Kunsk, Professor Ruffert, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to be here with me and with us this evening. I'm honoured to address you today as part of the series of Humboldt speeches on Europe. At the outset, I'd like to thank Professor Ruffert and his team at the Walter Hallstein Institute for European Constitutional Law for organising today's event, as well as the Stiftung Mercator and the project Wir sind Europa for their support too. My apologies for the pronunciation. I'm delighted to be in Berlin today for lots of reasons, and to have an opportunity to address you this afternoon in the wonderful surroundings of this historic university and indeed this historic city. I'm also grateful that I could spend the day meeting the different groups and leaders in the Bundestag, as well as with think tanks, the media and journalists, and Berlin-based European experts in think tanks. Equally, I was very pleased to host Foreign Minister Maas in Dublin just a few weeks ago, and can I say for the record, I am hugely impressed by the new German Foreign Minister in terms of his thoughts on the future of Europe and indeed the impact of the European Union in other parts of the world. For Ireland, our bilateral relationship with Germany is, was and will be of the utmost importance to us. For Ireland, to be blunt, Germany is now an indispensable partner. Ireland and Germany work together daily in an ongoing, ever-evolving project that we know as the European Union. That work encompasses a huge array of policies of vital interest to our citizens: agricultural policy, the environment, banking regulation, cybersecurity, and so much more. Germany is also Ireland's second largest source of inward investment, our third largest source of tourists, fourth largest trading partner, and fifth largest market for food. You buy, and I know this because I'm a former Minister for Agriculture, a lot of Irish butter. It just reminds me that the Germans have good taste, which is important. Today, our modern, diverse, and highly globalized island is expanding its international footprint. We launched this Global Ireland project Monday this week. It means many different things in many parts of the world. For example, it means by early next year, we will have opened new embassies or consulates in Colombia, Chile, New Zealand, Jordan, Mumbai, and Vancouver. And we will move on in the following year to open new embassies also in places like Kiev, Morocco, the Philippines. It was personally important to me, however, that this project should also have a real meaning here in Germany, our largest European partner, at the heart of our shared home in the EU. We want to continue the good relationship we have, but we also want to bring it to the next level, to do more together and to do it better. We also want to increase cooperation for the sake of increased cooperation, but we want to work together in more areas where there is real, measurable added value for both of our countries and our people. With this in mind, I asked my embassy and my very talented ambassador here in Berlin to carry out a review of Ireland-Germany relations and to put forward some concrete, measurable recommendations to bring Ireland's footprint in Germany to the next level, to make it both wider, but in particular to make it deeper. The recommendations aim to deepen our relationship in Berlin while widening our connections across 16 German states. They include the opening of a new consulate in Frankfurt next year, and in all likelihood, the opening of a second new consulate in Munich the following year. I was delighted to launch the review in Dublin with Minister Maas in April, and together with our German friends, we are already working on its recommendations. Next year, 2019, marks the 90th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Ireland and Germany, and it's fitting that we will be able to mark the occasion with the knowledge of a new, deeper friendship which is adapted to today's world and is evolving with a changing union. Of course, one of the most prominent evolutions is not a welcome one. The UK's decision to withdraw from the EU represents a challenge of unprecedented proportions for Ireland. We are simply more exposed and more vulnerable than any other European country to a bad outcome on Brexit. In fact, we're more exposed to any outcome on Brexit. The United Kingdom remains Ireland's single most important economic partner. We both joined the European Union on the same day, on the 1st of January 1973, together with Denmark. Our common membership and the shared EU rules we have helped to make have facilitated and developed our cooperation, not just in the economic sphere or in such important areas as aviation, research and the environment, but in human terms too. And people shouldn't underestimate the importance of that. Politicians, diplomats and civil servants grew more familiar and found each other easier to work with as they sat around the same EU negotiating tables and met in the same corridors and cafes. This factor was not unimportant in developing the atmosphere of trust and partnership in which Ireland and Britain could cooperate in building a peace process in Northern Ireland that has been one of the great successes in British-Irish relations, but also one of the great successes for the European Union in terms of the endorsement and the support that we continue to get for that process. And of course, protecting the hard-won gains of that peace process and the Good Friday Agreement is now a central dimension to the Irish government's approach on Brexit. We have been heartened by the solidarity shown by Germany and all of our EU partners, in fact, in taking our concerns on board in the EU's approach to the negotiating process. In simple terms, Ireland's vulnerability and Ireland's problems have become the EU's problems. This process is now reaching a critical phase. The overall objective is that the full legal text of the withdrawal agreement, as well as a detailed political declaration on the framework for future relationship, is to conclude by the October meeting of the European Council. That's the plan, that's the hope. As things stand, we have some way to go in order to achieve this. Most immediately, it is clear that we need to see significantly more progress on the outstanding withdrawal issues, particularly those issues relating to my country, including in the draft protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland ahead of the June European Council meeting on the 28th. Ireland, of course, shares the EU's preference for an overall EU-UK future relationship which would resolve all of the issues around the Irish border and indeed protecting the Good Friday Agreement, which was agreed 20 years ago and is the foundation of the Irish peace process. However, it remains vital, especially given the current UK red lines around that future relationship, that a legally binding backstop is agreed to provide certainty that in any and all circumstances a hard border will be avoided on the island of Ireland. The UK has also agreed the need for a backstop, but has expressed its unhappiness with the approach provided for in the draft protocol that's there so far. In this regard, Britain presented its own written proposal last week. The UK proposal focuses on the customs dimension of avoiding a hard border. Importantly, it also acknowledges that there are critical regulatory requirements that will also need to be addressed and that weren't addressed in the paper that they published last week. Last Friday, Michel Barnier confirmed that the EU will reflect on these proposals. In doing so, he has set out 3 core questions that need to guide the EU's considerations. Firstly, is it a workable solution to avoid a hard border? Secondly, does it respect the integrity of the single market and the customs union, which he has an obligation to do? And thirdly, is it an all-weather backstop? What he means by that is, will it stand the test of time? Or is this some kind of political convenient solution that in time will fall apart? Because if it is, we can't have it. Critical questions clearly remain about the position as expressed by the UK, and further intensive work will be required in order to make the progress needed on the backstop before the summit this month. This needs to be, in my view, the highest priority for all sides in the weeks ahead. Ireland doesn't want to be in this position, but the truth is that issues linked to Ireland and Northern Ireland in relation to protecting a peace agreement and in relation to preventing the re-emergence of a physical border are now in the spotlight, at the centre of the EU negotiations. Not where we want to be, but where we have found ourselves because of the approach of Britain in terms of leaving the European Union. It's not comfortable, but it's where we are, and we need to find a way through. The clock is ticking, and time is not waiting for us. We all need to urge our UK friends to bring greater realism and focus to the process in the coming weeks. The prize of a comprehensive withdrawal agreement, a suitable transition phase for everybody, an ambitious framework for our future relationship and continued peace and good relations on the island of Ireland is a prize worth working intensively for in the coming days and indeed in the coming months. Our former Taoiseach, or Prime Minister, Bertie Ahern, led the Irish government that negotiated the peace agreement in 1998. when he spoke here in 2005, he said he was acutely aware he was speaking at a time of great uncertainty for the European Union. Some of you may have been here for that speech. That was after the rejection of the European Constitution by France and by the Netherlands, but before Ireland rejected and then accepted the Lisbon Treaty. In the meantime, we have had even more uncertainty. The global financial crisis, which rocked the Eurozone to its core. The migration crisis, which continues. And, of course, Brexit itself. Each crisis has been an existential moment for the European Union. But the European Union has never stopped evolving, ever since its inception. Change has never come easily to our union. It began as a peace project. It set up more sophisticated agricultural policy to provide livelihoods for farmers and guaranteeing supply of food to consumers. It established a single market with, later on, its own currency. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, it put in place, as you know only too well, the architecture to bring together a once deeply divided continent. Each of these projects was developed and then delivered at a time of so-called great uncertainty. And not for the first time, there is a sense that the European Union is in the throes of another period of great uncertainty. Brexit begs questions about what we really mean when we talk of an ever closer union. At this juncture, in my view, we must take the most pragmatic of approaches in trying to simply address the needs and concerns of our citizens. This is essentially the approach we took in the Bratislava summit just after the Brexit referendum in 2016. And this, I am convinced, will be the best way to face down the populists who try to tell us that Europe has lost its way. In Ireland, we launched a citizens' dialogue process last November, and we have taken the debate on the future of Europe out of Dublin and across the country. We've basically said to people, what kind of shared home do you want from EU membership in 5 and 10 and 20 years' time? What kind of Europe do you want for your children? And what are you worth fighting for? We wanted to reach the people, not just the usual suspects. And I suspect the usual suspects are many people in this room, with all due respect. Similar exercises are getting going now across other member states. But ours, I think, has already yielded interesting results. At each session, we asked our citizens to address 5 issues. And these were sessions in universities, in town halls, in public meetings in different parts of the country. And we asked the question, 1, how can we have a more prosperous and competitive union? And what does that mean to you? 2, how can we make it more sustainable in terms of protecting an environment for the future? 3, how can we make it more socially responsible in terms of trying to close the gap between rich and poor and ensuring that everybody has a stake? 4, how can we make it safe and a secure union? And finally, how do we shape globalization before it shapes us? These, for us in Ireland, were key questions as a small country that believes that the European Union has answers to all of these questions, and that believes that we cannot answer these questions on our own, or at least if we try and answer, we can't deliver on the solutions on our own. The process of engagement has been very well received. Our citizens have been ready to engage with sincerity on these issues. There has been a real focus on the future rather than raking over the past, which often dominates political debate. As many of you know, our constitutional arrangement in Ireland has meant that we have had to have a referendum to endorse all key EU treaty changes. We had a referendum in 1972, which happened to be the year that I was born, prior to our accession. And since then, the Single European Act, the Maastricht Treaty, the Amsterdam Treaty, the Nice Treaty, and the Lisbon Treaty have all been put to the Irish people by referendum sometimes more than once. These have been lively and sometimes bruising affairs, and it has been a challenge to ask people to say yes, often to very complex questions. But I believe this level of public engagement, while maybe it frustrated others in Europe who were waiting for Ireland to decide, has served us well, even if it has sometimes been perceived as frustratingly onerous. I would even argue that setbacks on the way, such as the initial rejection of the Nice Treaty and then the Lisbon Treaty, have helped us focus better on the type of Europe that we're ready for. Even the setback involved engagement with citizens in a very direct way, appealing for their votes and supports. The quality of our recent citizens' dialogue exercises have been excellent, since we didn't have to reduce the issues to a simple yes or no. And when you're not asking people to make a decision, but you're asking for their view, you sometimes politically get a much more honest answer. In the absence of the confrontational atmosphere of a referendum campaign, we have been able to have a completely different type of debate, a more nuanced one, where the complexities of the issues could be teased out and all sides were ready to lend an ear to a variety of different views. And in many of these meetings, actually, people were listening to each other as much as listening to people who were making the presentations from the top table. We're still stifling through the debates and analysing the content, but a number of messages are already clearly emerging from that dialogue. The Irish people see their future in Europe, and we want Europe to be at the heart of our future. This is borne out by opinion polls, which show that 92% of Irish people today value EU membership and want to remain part of the European Union. 92%. The figure rises to 97% for 18 to 24-year-olds. In other words, students and young people in Ireland, almost every one of them say that they believe in the European Union and what it has to offer for my little country. They want a fair society. They want young people to have the opportunity to start careers and families. They want older people to have dignified and comfortable and safe retirement. They want this generation to protect the planet and pass on to the next generation a planet that is still sustainable. They want a shared society to be safe as well as sustainable. They want a wider, not narrower, breadth of vision for the European Union. They do not want countries to look inward. They want us together to look outwards. This breadth of vision is much wider than an economic reform agenda, which is the lens that some people continue to view the European Union through. It must encompass a social dimension, which puts people first, and it has to satisfy our appetite for culture so that we can have a better understanding of the views and perspectives of our European neighbours. In other words, we value the identity that each individual country carries, while at the same time we want solidarity and a togetherness in terms of the future. This is the solidarity we need on the streets of Europe today. This is how we make a credible offer to our citizens. This is how we build a better future in tune with the lives of the people and not the populists who want to frighten and who want to mislead and who want to promise things that are undeliverable. We need a strategy to deliver this. The debate on Brexit is sometimes cast in terms of cherry picking, but the debate on our collective future in Europe should be guided by solidarity, the strength of the togetherness of the European Union as opposed to the strength of its individual parts. Solidarity extends to bringing peace and stability to the continent and indeed to our neighbourhood, which we need to increase our focus on. Yes, it is about reform of the markets, but it is also about improving living conditions for workers and offering relief to those who are fleeing war and persecution. And there is a great urgency in this. Europe is getting smaller, not because Britain is leaving, but smaller in terms of its share in the world's population and smaller in terms of its share in global wealth. We're also getting older. Think about this for a second. Soon, the average European will be twice as old as the average African. More than half the jobs we are doing today are vulnerable to automation. Facing this challenge, our citizens want us to invest even more in education, even more in research and innovation. This is how we will keep a competitive edge in a new world dominated by China, India, Africa, and a changing America. In some sectors of the economy, 90% of the roles require digital skills. The Digital Economy and Society Index tracks digital performance and digital competitiveness in EU member states. Both Ireland and Germany score above EU average, I'm glad to say, but both of us have room for improvement if we're honest. We need to teach young people how to adapt and how to cope with change. 65% of children entering school today will work in jobs that do not exist yet. Most of them haven't even been thought of yet. So we need to invest in skills now in order to prepare them for redeployment, not just employment. There was a time when some people in this room were in college where a career was likely to be a career for life. Now education has to be about preparing young minds to adapt and be flexible to the new realities and new economies that they need to survive in. The European Commission is proposing that we spend 1.5 times more on the next multi-annual financial framework on research, innovation and digital. And the Commission is proposing a doubling of spend on youth. And they're right. Our role is to ensure that they spend that properly and get full value for money. But they have my endorsement in terms of the ambition. I'm pleased to say that almost 10% of German funding drawn down by the EU's Horizon 2020 fund for research was in collaboration with Irish partners. And we have almost 200 collaborative academic relationships between researchers in Ireland and Germany. You see, sometimes little member states can make a difference in big ones. These are the strong research links that will underpin our investment and indeed our trade connections in the future. Together in the EU, we have made great strides ensuring we are reaping the full potential of today's digital reality. But we need to get ready for the next digital wave, as we have had to do in the past. We need to invest, as I've said, more in research and innovation. The model we show, the model we should follow must be a holistic one, like the model in this university, integrating the arts and the sciences together to ensure that we use both imagination as well as technology. This is a win-win opportunity, and we've got to take it. More research and new technology means that the Europe of the future will no longer be the largest importer of fuel in the world. We should be able to cut our annual fuel bill of 350 billion euros and spend it in Europe on more productive projects. At the same time, this should help us cut our carbon footprint and protect the environment for future generations. These are the sort of citizen-driven initiatives we need to focus on. But we also need to complete the projects that we set out to deliver some time ago. And there are a number of those. The single market, one of the great achievements of the European Union over the last 25 years. It is 80% complete in goods, but it's only 40% complete in services. Services account for 65% of the Union's GDP and 70% of its total employment. I suggest most of the students in this room will end up in that type of employment. But cross-border services account for only 5% of our GDP. Completing the single market in services could add at least 300 billion euros to the Union's GDP. We should complete it, and we should do so by tackling the restrictive practices that still remain. This should include boosting our efforts to mutual recognition of vocational and professional qualifications for a start. Such a step would also strengthen our hand in the global stage when we argue for a rules-based system for free trade rather than the sort of lose-lose trade wars that unfortunately we have seen indications of coming from the United States recently. Ladies and gentlemen, I am convinced we can guide ourselves out of the current uncertainty if we remain committed to the long-term needs of our citizens. From an Irish perspective, Germany will be our indispensable partner in the future of Europe. Between now and the European Parliament elections next year, we need to put our minds together in imagining a credible future that resonates with our people. That is a future that needs to focus on quality of life. It needs to focus on the new challenges that we face. It needs to focus on the concerns and worries and fears of young people and not so young people. It cannot ignore the realities of what is going on outside of the European Union, particularly on the continent of Africa and indeed across the Middle East. In my view, the political infrastructure that is currently in place to facilitate political dialogue between the EU and the African Union, for example, is absolutely unfit for purpose. Think about this for a second. We know that our neighbouring continent to the south is going to have to cope with, in the next 25 to 30 years, an increase in its population by 1 billion people. 1 billion people. Twice the population of our entire union. We know at the same time they will have to deal with climate change and its impacts, desertification and its impacts, food security and its impacts, water security, regional conflict, corrupt governance, mass movement of people, and so much more with an extra 1 billion people. We know, because the numbers don't lie, that if you take some examples on the continent of Africa, Ethiopia, for example, to simply keep pace with the demographics and the growing population that they have, they need to create 2 million jobs every year in Ethiopia to keep pace with the number of people who are eligible for the workforce. The neighbouring country of Kenya needs to create 1 million jobs a year. This is impossible when you add up what all of these countries as neighbours of ours have to do in the space of time that they're going to have to do it. And so we have a divisive and difficult debate on migration raging in this country and across the European Union right now. And we are not going to answer the questions that our public are asking of us in the context of migration purely on the basis of putting up fences and borders. And so Europe needs to have a hugely ambitious vision for what it wants to achieve on the continent of Africa in partnership, as opposed to linked purely to development aid, but in partnership, so that our technology, your technology, and the solutions that we have available to us in the European Union can be transferred seamlessly and without cost to help solve the extraordinary problems that are going to unfold and develop on the continent of Africa. And so far, the political debate on migration in reality is only scratching the surface, despite the fact that it's deeply divisive and damaging. And think of where we could be in 25 years' time. We could be talking about trying to deal with millions of people looking for a better life in Europe rather than hundreds of thousands. And so there is a need not only to spend more money, and people will talk about a new Marshall Plan coming from the European Union for the continent of Africa. This isn't primarily about money, although it will need money. What it's really about is politics, about decision-making and partnership and shared responsibility to help countries respond to problems that they cannot cope with on their own. What I would say the same, or what I would say is something similar about the Middle East. History will judge the international community very harshly in terms of what we have allowed to happen in recent decades in the Middle East. Syria, Yemen, the Middle East peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. Europe's inability to be able to intervene and influence to the extent that we should be able to, given our scale and our wealth and our influence. We need to find better ways of impacting on global decision-making to protect our own interests, but also because we have a moral obligation to do that. These are the kind of things that I believe German people and Irish people are interested in discussing with political leaders, so that when we do settle on an approach to the future of Europe, the approach is not just based on think tanks and intellectual rigor, although that's necessary too, but it's street tested as well. Otherwise, we will make decisions that people will ask questions of in a few years' time to say, I never signed up for that. And believe me, the diversity of politics that we have to manage now across the European Union demands that level of rigor and debate to ensure that we keep this union together and to ensure that together we can overcome generational problems that many people in this room will be involved in providing solutions to. So thank you very much. I hope I've got you thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanishta, for this most inspiring speech. We have very little time, and I will give a preference to very few questions from our Humboldt University students. So if they please are as courageous as they are in the lectures and ask questions which they feel inclined to, please raise your hands or stand up for a question if you so wish. Please, in the back of the room. Please try to be short and precise.
It's a very short question. Could you imagine that Brexit process would promote a new situation in which there could happen a reunification of Ireland in the near future?
Yeah. So we're starting with a controversial question then. I think it's not helpful when we are trying to find practical solutions to protect the status quo in Ireland, when some political parties choose to use the tension and the polarization that Brexit has brought to Northern Ireland to promote constitutional change on the island. I'm a nationalist, so my views on this are clear in terms of the distant future. But my job right now is to find a way with the British government, with parties in Northern Ireland, working with Michel Barnier and his task force, who in my view are doing a fantastic job, to try and find practical solutions to very complex problems. I could spend the next 2 hours talking to you about Brexit and Northern Ireland and protecting the Good Friday Agreement and the reasons why the absence of a physical border on the island of Ireland is so important. In Germany, I think you will understand why the absence of the re-emergence of a physical border on the island of Ireland is so important. As we drove in the car today, the ambassador showed me where the wall used to be. And I have no intention of being part of a government that allows barriers and checks and fences to be rebuilt on my island. It's not going to happen. So it is not helpful, I think, right now to talk about the solution to preventing that from happening as the reunification of the island of Ireland. We know the rules around how that choice can be made in the future. It's in our peace agreement. It will have to happen by consent. People can vote on that if they want to in the future, and there's a mechanism to trigger that vote. But to be honest, that is a distraction that we probably don't need right now. Because unionists in Northern Ireland feel threatened by Brexit, because they feel that the solutions to solving some of the Irish issues may create a separation between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. Nationalists in Northern Ireland feel threatened by Brexit equally, because of the prospect of the re-emergence of a physical border that may separate them from what they see as their own country. And so the Brexit debate has actually driven nationalists and unionists apart in a way that's very unhealthy, and in a way that has contributed to Northern Ireland not having its own devolved government for 18 months now, because parties can't work together. And in a way that has created a real complex political challenge, because the largest unionist party in Northern Ireland happens to be the party that is keeping the British government in government through Brexit, offering only one perspective on the Northern Ireland problem in Westminster. So lots of difficult issues for us to try to manage. So I think introducing the aspiration for a united Ireland in the middle of all of these Brexit conversations is probably unhelpful and will cause more problems than it will solve. So it's a long answer to a short question.
Thank you very much. Is there a further question? Please, the gentleman on the right. Yes, please.
Mr. Coveney, I have a question related to Irish-German relations. You spoke about Ireland's desire to deepen and widen cooperation with Germany within the institutional framework of the EU in wake of Brexit. So what I would like to know from you is, in which areas do you think there are common positions where Ireland and Germany can get on? But more interestingly, where do you think the challenges lie? In which policy areas do you think will Ireland and Germany be at odds with each other in the near and distant future?
You're really looking to get an argument going here. Good question, though. Can I say that I think my views on Africa, for example, would very much be shared by Minister Maas, and indeed by the previous foreign minister in Germany, who had very strong views on this issue as well. I believe that our views on the single market and how it functions are very similar. Germany and Ireland want to ensure that we prevent any protectionism developing within elements of the market. We have similar views in relation to financial services too, in terms of trying to create a functioning, common and sustainable, safe market whereby the rules apply equally to everybody. Sometimes that's tough. We know what it's like to come through a very tough financial challenge, having to work with the IMF and European institutions. But this year, the Irish economy will be the fastest growing economy in the European Union for the 4th year in a row. We'll be the youngest population in the European Union, and we'll be the fastest growing population too. So we have managed to create a sustainable economic model, I think, having learned some pretty harsh and expensive lessons in terms of mistakes in the past. And actually our interaction with Germany during that period was hugely helpful. Sometimes pretty tough and blunt, but I think also helpful during that period. So I think there are a lot of areas where we will work together. In fact, Minister Maas and I are hoping to travel to Africa together in the autumn to do a joint visit to a number of African countries. Areas where I think we have some disagreement. I suppose taxation. No, but hang on a second. I think our views on digital taxation, for example, aren't that far apart. We accept that the global economy has transformed with digitalization of it. We need to make sure that companies pay their fair share of tax globally, somewhere in the world. And we are working through the OECD to do that. And the OECD has named Ireland as the #1 country for tax transparency, actually. So we have a low corporate tax rate, but we're very transparent about it. There are lots of countries in Europe that actually disguise or provide camouflage in relation to their corporate tax treatment of big companies. Ireland is up front, 12.5% tax. It's low, but that's it. We're entitled to do it. And it's a fiscal tool that has created a competitive environment for foreign direct investment in Ireland. But we are happy to discuss that. But it is an important part of the Irish economic model. So what I would say is that the solutions that we have to find here on taxation should come through the OECD as much as possible. If we try to do things on our own in the European Union, we will find that we will see a lot of business investment move outside of the European Union because there will be a different tax model in parts of the OECD versus the European Union, which isn't good for anybody. But I do think there will be an ongoing debate with Germany and indeed with France on some who want to see a common corporate tax base and a common corporate tax rate across the European Union, and other countries, Ireland isn't the only one, that wants to see more flexibility in terms of countries making their own strategic decisions. The final thing I'd say is that there's a perception sometimes in Germany that Ireland has the lowest corporate tax rate in the European Union and in the OECD. Far from it. About 1/3 of the membership of the OECD has a lower corporate tax rate than Ireland. So, let's talk about the facts here rather than the perceptions. But that said, we have an obligation to constantly take on that debate and make sure that we reassure people that the tax base and the tax rates in Ireland are transparent and they're consistent with EU rules. And I think we are absolutely committed to doing that. So I suppose that's the good, the bad, and the ugly there. So.
Thank you very much for your answer. I'm sorry, I have the timetable of the minister being signed to me in a way, so there is no other space for further questions. But I think with the last question we tackled very interesting issues and issues that people are most interested about of Irish policy. Taoiseach, thank you so much for being with us here today. Now, for you not to forget or to better remember this afternoon, I first of all wish to thank you and have a little gift on this part of this university. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. This gives us hope for what's going on.